I don't think everyone knows each other, so feel free to work off the name tags and reintroduce yourself. So I want tonight to be a celebration of the fact that we've all got something in common here, and it's also the 5th birthday of Upstart. The site was set up by me and my colleague Chris Scanlon. He's just in the room. He's just become a dad for the second time, so he might be changing nappies tonight.
Laurie first approached me in 2009 about the potential of Upstart and being the founding editor of it and the sole editor of it, and I thought, well, why should I do this? Other than the fact that I needed to finish an elective off, and with no disrespect to John Benson in the room, there were no appealing media electives at the time. So I thought, sure, why not do it? Gives me a break from law. And I did, and I kept thinking to myself, what makes this site different to a blog? You know, we're constantly telling students to showcase their work, and we keep telling them today. And I think the point is that, and as so many of you in this room know, it's the editorial process that your stories have to go through. And I commended my students on Monday after the class, funnily enough via Facebook, because that's how we communicate, saying that, you know, you're at a point now in your degrees where you've grasped so well the idea of what a story is that you're now employable. And when you go for the journalism interviews, it's one of the few questions that you're asked is, you know, well, pitch me a story. What's a story today? And I think that's what Upstart teaches, and the publication teaches, which is vital. Because everything else you can do. You can do a blog, you can have a couple of mates who can sub your work and put it up. You won't have the benefit of having working journalists as supervising academics and people who do this for a living coming together and actually, you know, building a publication.
And I think the really interesting thing about Upstart is, and going through it again today, and having seen it, its various iterations and how it's evolved over those 5 years, is that one of the beauties of it is that it actually, for all it is, it actually works in collating, curating and reporting in the same way that we all do. So there are sections about politics and society, there are sections about fashion and lifestyle, there are sections about sport. So for all of you who have contributed to Upstart, for all of you who have thought about what Upstart is and have written those stories for it, or even now who still engage with it, you're actually, you know, in perfect sync with what mainstream media is on about. And what that says to me is that the very same skills that you've demonstrated over the years through the work you've done for Upstart are exactly the same kind of skills that we in mainstream media are looking for.
5 years on, I think the fact that we've got a business model, we're part of a university, we've got over, we long ago passed 1 million page views, we've got 5,000 people following us on Twitter, and I think it's clear from the reaction of people doing the subject online editing and publishing, where we're up to 15 students every semester work on a publication, that we've hit on something that does give students a great deal of practical experience during their time at university.
It's all about the learning outcomes for me, for Upstart as a publication. Rather than where we sit in the wide world of journalism, it's about what you guys, current students in the room and alumni who are here tonight have learnt from it. And the last 12 months, Upstart's been at its absolute best, I think, both in terms of numbers and the hits that we've got, but also the 2 big projects that Laurie alluded to earlier in the night. That was, of course, covering the federal election, which involved about 10 students working every single day in coming up with story ideas. And I think that's where we need to go as well. And, you know, I'm really keen to hear Nick's thoughts on that later in the night, about covering big events.
Journalism is obviously constantly being redefined. Journalism skills are also deployed across a much broader range of professional environments. And what follows on from that is that journalism degrees are always works in progress. You've never nailed it, you've never finished working on it. And what I'm really proud of is, I think, the ability that we've had in the last year or two to be able to develop and strengthen relationships with a whole lot of media organisations.
I think we need to keep doing that, those big events, and seeking industry guidance from people like Nick and people like Paul, and getting them to tell us where the graduates aren't necessarily, or where their skill set can be improved and what role we can play. Because I think it all comes together in this publication and in this learning outcome. And it's all about the learning outcomes for students, I think, and seeing so many of you in this room and where you guys are at or where you're heading, just I think fills all of our hearts with joy as journalism educators. And as long as we focus on the learning outcomes and continue to do what we're doing, I think it'll make my job and our jobs all the more meaningful. Thank you very much.
The idea for Upstart really came about because students at La Trobe Uni didn't have the kind of publication where within the degree itself where they could publish material regularly and do it in a digital platform. And at the time when we set it up, we really were struggling to think of where students could get work published. And so me and my colleague Chris Scanlon decided it would be great to do something that would serve the purpose of being a showcase of student work, but instead of doing what all the other universities do, because a lot of them do great showcases for student work, why not take on its own mission as a publication to be for emerging journalists? We started off really with the idea that we wanted this to be something that would give journalism students at La Trobe something like the experience they get if they went on an internship somewhere. And it proved to be a real hit from the start because we had absolutely no publicity whatsoever, and we just relied on sharing stories that we were publishing on social media to build an audience. And starting from a base of zero, of course, everything looks good. But within the first year, we really had an audience that was not just noticing our articles, but was retweeting them on Twitter, sharing them on Facebook. And this suddenly felt like an exciting space to be in.
So I was the founding editor of Upstart magazine in 2009. Laurie Zion and Chris Scanlon, who basically came up with the concept, approached me. I was in my final year of studies at La Trobe at the time, and they said, "Do you want to edit it?" And I said, "Sure." So it was just me. So now we've got 20 people editing the publication, but it was just me at the time. And then it was sole editors for a while after that. So it basically involved kind of what students are doing at the moment in terms of editing and coming up with stories, commissioning a lot of work, which isn't done as much now because there's so many of so many students on board. And then since it's come obviously a long way, so we've got 20 editors now, including section editors, and it's grown to be a publication that mainstream media takes seriously and really serves an important role in journalism overall.
I was at Upstart in 2009, towards the end of 2009. I edited Upstart during the summer break, which was quite difficult back then because there weren't a lot of contributors that were available during summer. So my job essentially was to rustle up people to write stories for us.
Since I left Upstart, which was my final year of uni, I got a job at the Kalgoorlie Miner in WA, which is a daily newspaper, and WA is one of only 2 daily newspapers in WA. I worked there for 12 months before returning to Victoria to teach at La Trobe University for a year, and then I secured a job with the Ballarat Courier, and I've been working there ever since as a crime and politics reporter.
My first job out of university was working for Crikey, the online news site. And there I was a reporter for 2.5 years, writing stories about pretty much everything. A lot of politics stories, whatever came up during the day I would write about. I also wrote quite a few profiles for one of their websites called the Power Index, which involved profiles about people who are powerful in Australian society. Included interviewing Julian Assange and a few others. And after that I got a job working for the Courier newspaper in Ballarat as a reporter, and I worked there for a year, and I've just started at The Age as one of their editorial trainees.
So at Upstart I was part of the editorial team. I think it was sort of in its second or third year that they had an editorial team, as in an 8 or 9 team amount of people in it. We edited everyone's stories. It was a really good experience. I think editing other people's stories might not seem like it helps your writing, but it does more than probably anything else. We used to have to write a story about once a week, so every week you'd be trying to source your own stories and figure out what you would write about. But it was a really useful experience, and even today I look back and it was an enjoyable experience as well.
It's really interesting because, you know, I get to read all of the pieces and watching the writers grow, especially as writers, you know, from week 1 to week 10. From week 1 to week 10, you know, just watching how the writers have progressed in terms of their news making and story finding has been really, really rewarding. And, you know, in terms of the role, like, I put in a lot of effort, but I think it comes back in spades in, you know, what I learn as well.
There've been a lot of highlights working with Upstart, but one moment that really stands out was when we had a project called the 100 Articles Every Journalism Student Should Read About Journalism, and that was put together by students who were doing final year in the bachelor degree and who were doing a master's degree were running at the time. And one of the articles was about a really great piece of journalism from an American journalist, and we published it at the start of a class and put it up on Twitter, and by the end of the class the person who'd written the article was retweeting it, and we had hundreds and hundreds of people looking at the piece about this particular piece of journalism. And I guess what it brought home to everyone in the class was that what you read might be read by the person you're writing about, but also that we're in a truly global environment with online publishing.
Funny moments. I think one funny moment when I was with Upstart is that I went on a paid trip with another former editor, Erdem Kosh. We went to Kuwait, which was a government-funded trip by the Kuwaiti government, and it was a journalism study trip. And the whole time we had to essentially travel around Kuwait and find stories and learn about everything that we could learn about Kuwait. Unfortunately, because it was sponsored by the Kuwaiti government, they had a habit of spinning us, I guess, to use a PR term. They didn't like telling us the truth, or they would find ways of, you know, telling us that an oil field was, you know, fantastic for the environment, or things like that. It also didn't help that the country of Kuwait is a dry country, according to their religion, and so we couldn't get a drink for 10 days. So we also couldn't discuss it over a beer, which was pretty tough.
I read a lot, talk to as many people as you can, just try and look for if you aspire to be a certain type of journalist, whether it's fashion or news or lifestyle, look at what those people do and aspire to be as good as them and find out why they're good and try and copy those key skills.
A tip for an emerging journalist that I would have is to produce as much online content as you can. Send it into upstartmagazine.net.au and just get as much content as you can out there for your name.
I think it needs to continue doing what it's doing, and also, as you know, we've heard tonight quite a bit, for students to do basically what's required of you as a journalist. So to build sources, to interview, to break stories where required, to write as much as you possibly can. It's all, for me, Upstart's all about what the students get out of it and what students learn from it. And I think to date we've proved that that's priceless, and it just needs to continue doing that.